Okay, we'll just give folks another minute or so to pop in before we start the webinar. But because I want to just keep an eye on everyone's time and make sure that we end on time as well. But I will have a couple of announcements at the beginning. So we'll just wait till 3:01 and then I'll start all the announcements really quickly. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for attending this session of the Missouri A and OER annual conference. It's our third annual conference. So if you're making sure that you're in the right panel, this is a Texas path to advancing a statewide ecosystem for OER. And I'm sorry. I need to just go ahead and get our captioner going. Okay, there we go. So just a few bits. So live captioning is available during this presentation, and you can turn it off and on at the bottom of your screen by turning on the captioning or turning it off if you prefer. This session is being recorded and will be provided on the conference website following probably sometime next week or the week after, but following the conference. Also, a copy of the presentation slides will be available on the conference website as well. Please enter any questions that you have into the Q&A box. We will answer them, but closer to the end of the presentation after all the presentations are done. We encourage you to engage with us through the chat function, and I will be monitoring that and keeping an eye on that. Lastly, if you have any technical issues or problems, please contact Tracy Stout. That's TracyStout at missouri.edu. And now, without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists. So Judith Sebesta is the Executive Director of the Higher Education Consortium of Texas, Digitex, and the President of the Executive Council for the Community College Consortium for OER. Judith's gender pronouns are she, her, hers. Michelle Singh is the Assistant Commissioner of Digital Learning at Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And Kyla Torre is the Director of Digital Learning at the Texas Higher Educational Coordinating Board. And so I turn it over to our wonderful presenters to hear about the Texas Path to OER. So thank you.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. We're excited to talk to you about our landscape survey in Texas. I'm just gonna share our presentation. Okay, so yes, we come from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board and Digitex. I'll talk a little bit about what those organizations are, and we're here to talk to you about our landscape survey and the results of the two that we've had so far. So we were introduced, but this is us. Judith is at Digitex, and Michelle and I are at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board within the Digital Learning Division. So we've had, back in 2019, we decided that it was a good idea to do a landscape survey of the OER programs, policies, processes that were going on in Texas. There were a lot of different pockets happening around the state, and there was some legislative interests that had started. And so we decided it would be a good idea to get an overview of what that looked like in Texas. So Digitex and the coordinating boards partnered with the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education, or ISKME. They're the owners of OER Commons, if you haven't heard of them, but they also do educational or OER-based research. And so we did a survey on OER programs, policies, and practices at both 2- and 4-year institutions, both independent nonprofit. And then in the second iteration of the survey that was just done in 2021, we added our health-related institutions. So I talked a little bit about why we conducted the statewide survey, but there's a lot of OER advocacy in Texas. There's a lot of grassroots organization. We wanted to get a view on what was happening at our various institutions because we knew there was a lot happening. We just didn't know exactly what it was. And so we also wanted to be able to inform programs moving forward, and so that we could better target the needs of the institutions. And we collaborated, we at the coordinating board we're the state agency that provides leadership and collaboration for higher education in Texas. So we had, our reputation. And then Digitex has a strong reputation in the OER field. And of course, ISKME has a national, they've done a lot of national research in various regions and across the country about OER. So we did the first survey in 2019, and we found quite a few interesting things that were going on in Texas. One was that there was a growing commitment to OER. So there was over 50% of the institutions had either started an OER program or policy or were thinking about it or on their way to it. We found that professional development was a priority and a need, especially for faculty. We found that success in OER at the institutions was a collaborative effort, and that many institutions were starting sort of centralized offices or task force or something like that that included people from across their institutions. And also that some institutions were collaborating regionally. We found that few institutions were doing data collection at that point, or they were primarily doing data collection on affordability. So it was really a sort of nascent area. And then we found that the primary barriers to OER were just the awareness level of the faculty, and also competing priorities of the institution. So I'm going to hand it over to Judith to talk about our most recent survey that we did just this past year and give you some updates as to what it looks like now.
Great, thank you so much, Kyla, and thanks for that overview of the 2019 survey. It was great to get a kind of baseline survey that we could then build on, both with this second biennial survey, but then in the future as well. So that's really a main purpose that 2019 survey provided for us. But the purpose of the 2021 survey kind of expanded from there, just similarly to survey and assess growth and challenges related to OER commitment and use across the state's institutions since 2019, so that we were able to compare data from that 2019 survey with this 2021 survey, which we conducted in spring of 2021. Now, for the 2019 survey, we actually had invited 158 institutions to participate, but for this one, we expanded to include our health-related institutions within Texas. So that meant a total of 169 four-year public-private, two-year public institutions, and the health-related institutions. And we were very pleased that 111 responded to this survey. We disseminated initially the survey or really it was the coordinating board that did, our state agency that Kyla and Michelle work with, to the campus provost or chief academic and chief instructional officers, which often include VPs, provosts. And then we instructed them to disseminate that survey to the OER knowledgeable person on their campus. But as you can see from the slide, what we ended up having was a number of the provost VPs, the CAOs and CIOs actually submitting that. They probably consulted with a lot of campus stakeholders. But we also had people who submitted it were the library staff, academic affairs administrators, deans, faculty, online learning administrators, and OER committee leads. The approach that ISKME, as our primary researchers, took was to work with us to develop a 37-question survey that focused on OER policies and programs in place or under development across institutions, and their OER implementation practices, their challenges that they experienced with those practices, and the supports that they had to help us build this statewide ecosystem of OER. The analysis that was conducted primarily by ISKME included descriptive analyses, comparative analysis for the subgroups, in other words, the 2-year versus 4-year sector, public versus private, etc. And for this one, by question comparisons between the 2019 and the 2021 survey data. What we found was that OER programs and policies have grown across the state. You can imagine that we were very pleased to see that, and that nearly all institutions are using OER to some extent. Here you can see that comparative data between the 2019 and the 2021 survey. So there's a not insignificant increase in those that have OER policies and or programs in place in that blue, the blue that you can see at the bottom of the bars. I do want to mention that those that had no plans to develop did report that faculty were using OER at the course level. So that indicated that pretty much all of the institutions were engaging in some form of OER practice. We also included opportunities to provide qualitative data to us, stories from the respondents and others at their campuses. And so we've interspersed some of these quotes throughout that are also included within our survey report. And by the way, towards the end of this, we're going to be talking about other resources, including these 2 surveys. And I'm going to drop in a link to a Google Doc where we have placed links to the majority, if not all, of the resources that we're talking about today, including the 2019 survey report and this 2021 one. But you got a chance to take a look at that. We had an OER coordinator who said that I believe we're at a tipping point. Faculty are growing more informed about OER and are more motivated. So at the same time, the adoption of open licensing policies and endorsements remains stagnant. So we were a little bit concerned about that, but we did find that some of this was promising. Institutions that have an open licensing policy or endorsement did include 5% and 41% planning to adopt. So we thought that that was fairly promising, but a little bit concerned about the fact that 55% said they had no plans to adopt. We'll see how that goes with the 2023 survey. The formalized definitions of OER are gaining prevalence. We do have a statewide definition of OER that has been adopted by the Texas legislature in the Texas Education Code. But institutions have either adopted that or adapted it or created their own definitions. And you can see that there was a significant increase in institutions that had a written definition of OER. So we were pleased to see that. Texas has legislation that mandates the marking of courses that use open educational resources. And that legislation had really just fairly recently with the 2019 survey been passed. So we were very interested to see if there was an increase in institutions that have course markers in place, having had more time to implement those markers per the legislation. And here again, it's a not insignificant increase in institutions, and we weren't surprised by that because they have had time to implement. But I did want to point out that institutions report they typically included the marker under the individual course listing in their course list or catalog, or through the campus bookstore listing. And then the next slide gives a little bit more information about this. Oh, I'm sorry. Here, this does this quote. Lack of thorough understanding of the requirements by those responsible for implementation and lack of coordination with more knowledgeable entities on campus have been the main obstacles in implementing our OER course marking system. Some elaboration that we received included points that the challenges for institutions in implementing this course marking primarily centered on lack of time to focus on course marking efforts, technology constraints, and a lack of financial resources to customize the technology to fit their catalog and or their bookstore. So here you're seeing that the availability of fully OER-based courses has increased from our 2019 to our 2021 survey, particularly among the two-year institutions. And I have to say that makes me very pleased because my organization primarily, not entirely, but primarily serves the public two-year institutions in the state. So very pleased to see this, quite possibly could be related to the fact that the initial institutions in the state who were really engaging in a more holistic OER practice were involved in the Achieving the Dream grant. There were about 8, I believe it was 8 colleges that were involved in that, and they kind of got a jump start. But we were pleased to see, though, that it's across these institutions that the percentage of fully OER-based undergraduate courses is increasing. An important aspect to open education work in Texas that we've realized through doing these surveys is that institutions are centralizing their OER work with a centralized committee or role leading this work, and that has increased. Again, it's not an insignificant increase, I would say. Not an insignificant increase across from 2019 to 2021. Hang on one second, Kyla. Let me check my notes because I wanted to see if I had anything to mention. No, you can go ahead. Thank you. Many are also leveraging cross-office support, and this ended up surfacing as one of the primary findings of the survey, which I'll come back to in just a little bit. You can see that 33 of the institutions that responded are leveraging all 3 offices that are indicated here. Their libraries, their digital offices of digital learning, their faculty excellence centers, whatever they might call those. So we have seen that this cross office support seems to be fairly crucial in supporting OER on these campuses. This OER task force lead stated that their institution leverages library staff and really can't overestimate the importance of librarians in Texas and I know beyond to the open education movement. They've coordinated the OER faculty mini grant initiative here, but they've also got teaching and learning staff providing instructional design support for faculty adopting OER and creating a community of practice for faculty. And their Center for Faculty Excellence staff are presenting at conferences on the use and efficacy of OER, publishing articles on OER and coordinating faculty collaboration with library staff. Whoever this OER task force, whatever campus they're from, we really like to applaud them because they clearly are quite advanced in their cross-office operational support of open education. This administrator and OER faculty trainer said that with the creation of a new open education librarian position, which we're seeing more and more across Texas and beyond, is the professionalization of this position. And multiple departments working together to support OER, our institution has been able to facilitate more programs to support OER awareness and adoptions campus-wide. We recognize that not all colleges and universities have the resources in order to have positions like that, but it does seem to be becoming more and more a priority. Institutional partnerships are also becoming increasingly important, we found. In other words, collaboration with other institutions. And that's quite a significant increase in those collaborations that are happening, be it through grant projects or other initiatives. We participate in a program through the Texas Digital Library, which incidentally is an organization that we collaborate with, Digitex and the coordinating board, to organize and implement our statewide Open Texas Conference. They bring together librarians across institutions who are responsible for open education programs on their campus and have OER ambassadors to do that. They share best practices, brainstorm ideas, and collaborate on professional development programs. Those are, as you can imagine, primarily librarians, but they offer, because they are involved in open education, they offer a lot of really great resources that are available to anyone. Professional learning remains a key priority, yet we were surprised to find that the percentage of faculty trained on OER remains low. And as a result of the 2019 survey that did indicate that we needed to increase faculty awareness of OER and that professional development was a key, we have been working to create more statewide programs. I think perhaps we need to do a better job of marketing those. So, you can see here the percentage of faculty that attended trainings was less than 10% for a majority of these. So it's something that we really need to continue to work on. And we will, largely through partnerships across agencies and institutions. Statewide OER training and grant programs are poised for support, yet, as I mentioned, they are underutilized. You can see here, each of these bars indicates kind of a different grant program or initiative that we've begun to implement. And you can see that participation as you go across there kind of gets lower and lower. So we really have a job to do in terms of marketing these and getting the word out, ensuring that we're maximizing these opportunities for the institutions. So what does the high-level summary of this landscape survey tell us? What do the data tell us? Well, we are moving towards an OER ecosystem across Texas. All indicators say that open education practices and policies are growing and expanding. The large majority of the state's institutions are implementing or on their way to formal policies or programs to support OER. Very encouraging. But only a small percentage are taking advantage of these statewide supports that we're offering. And the percentage of faculty trained on OER remains stagnant. So that's something that we need to address. And when I turn it over to Michelle in just a minute to talk about the ways we're addressing, I think you'll see that we really are working to take this research and data and make it actionable. Those leading the way in the implementation of OER clearly are taking a systems-based approach by engaging multiple offices and roles across campus and engaging in cross and interinstitutional collaborations as well. Michelle, let me turn it over to you to kind of talk about how we're turning research into action in Texas.
Thank you so much, Judy, for that. And so again, I think one of the biggest pieces that we looked at as the group that was initiating and participating in this research was, where is that disconnect? What is going on? We're putting in so many efforts into ensuring that we have these programmatic abilities across the state. We are trying to actively engage different stakeholders at all different levels of expertise, but we're still missing the boat when we have a decrease in faculty professional learning engagement. We also saw a decrease in faculty incentives at the institutions. And in all honesty, with the amount of events that we have had to adjust to over the last year and a half, 2 years with the pandemic, with weather conditions that are different. Texas had its first major winter storm that nearly shut down and incapacitated a lot of the institutions. There's been a lot of growth, a lot of investigation as to how we leverage things like digital learning and like open education. So we definitely will be seeing a different conversation arise after all of the smoke clears. But in the process, we realized very quickly as Digitex, as the coordinating board, that we needed to step in and do something, that we needed to make sure that we could assist our institutions that were already potentially struggling to meet the demands that were put on them in such an abrupt time period. And so everybody was struggling with remote learning, with adjusting on this digital environment, that we thought, what can we do and what can we put into action that could assist our different institutions that are working really hard to try new innovative practices. And so we've done a lot. Back with our legislation has approved and had approved open educational resource implementation and development grants. The first go round, it was only implementation grants. The second set of appropriations included development. And so we're very fortunate that we do have a legislative body that supports and is aware of OER and its impact, and really has put the money behind setting up some exciting resources that I'll talk about in the incoming slides. But in addition to that state appropriated funding, we also recently were very appreciative to the governor's office for being the recipients of the governor's emergency education relief funding to push forward efforts in OER across the state. And with that funding, we have managed to put a lot of different services and programs together that our institutions have really been taking advantage of over the course of the last year. So the Division of Digital Learning is relatively new to the game. We've only been in existence for about a year, although it seems that we're veterans at this, but we've only been in official existence for about a year. And in that time, we have seen a major increase in the activity and the partnerships that we've had specifically in the OER space. One of the things that I want to talk to you about today is how we are taking the community think tank of innovation and advocates for OER in the state and creating these professional learning opportunities so that we can bring everyone up to a level of awareness of what OER are, but also the advanced skills and creative skills. And so we launched a program with ISKME, who were our partners in research, called the Open Educational Resources Core Elements Academy. And that Core Elements Academy was an opportunity for our faculty to learn the basics of OER and receive a certificate of completion from ISKME. This complemented the efforts that were already underway through the sponsorship of Digitex, as well as Austin Community College with Texas Learn OER, which is something we'll also talk about. But this was filling a need, this was filling a gap that existed at institutions. As Judith mentioned, what we were discovering in the research was everyone, even if they wanted to at times learn more about OER, didn't have the expertise within their institution or didn't have the bandwidth within their professional learning staff to be able to really foster this OER conversation. And so by creating these academies and these core elements groups, we were able to reach, I do believe we had 150 faculty go through these different core elements academies, and the certificate was accomplished by about 60 of them. And so this was really much an informal, let's come in, let's learn what we need to, let me really focus in on those areas that I want to learn more about. And then if I want to achieve the certificate, I can. But the interest that we saw was extremely impressive. From the moment that we opened it to all of our institutions, I want to say the first time it took about 4 hours before we reached our threshold of 50. So we had to go from 50 to 80. And the second time it took about 4 to 6 hours as well. So the desire was present, especially as more people started to learn what OER were. And now we're going to continue to expand on that by creating an OER Advanced Skills Academy. People were asking, what comes next? What's my next step? Now I know what OER are. How can I get involved? How can I really begin to start curating and getting involved in this process? And so we'll be launching that academy within the incoming weeks and have already a waiting list of people that are wanting to join. So again, the interest is there. We just need to make sure that we can meet capacity. Then we were hearing from those individuals that have some experience and have already played around a little bit with OER and gotten their hands dirty and now really want to start creating. They want to contribute to the larger knowledge base, and they want to figure out, how do I do that? So we are creating creator communities, which will be launched in the summer. And this will be an opportunity for our faculty to get together and share their stories about creation, work together to create resources that we can then post in the OER Texas repository and share with all of the academic community. In addition, we heard from the resources that were on campuses that said, how can we get better at this? How can we increase our skill set? Or how can we recruit faculty who want to become trainers for this information on a campus? And we thought that was a wonderful opportunity and a great idea to develop a program. And so we are starting the first OER Train the Trainer program this summer that will be co-led by what we are calling the triangle of support, which is our digital learning groups, our libraries, and our Center for Faculty Development together, really working with them to create that ecosystem that was the result of the survey. Get them together and see not just on a campus, but how can we leverage their expertise across the state to build really robust resources that we can use so we don't start from scratch. On the concept of the ecosystem use and how we all come together to support these efforts, we are starting a digital learning ecosystem series where we're not just going to talk to the academic side, which is where a lot of the conversation of OER really stays, but we're starting to expand that into, how do we involve enrollment management? How do we involve institutional advancement? How do we bring on student success and student affairs so that this does become a university-wide conversation and that we can all start to realize OER are designed to share, to collaborate, to build, to adapt, to remix. Why does it have to be only in academics? It doesn't. We all have materials that we can benefit from. So let's expand that conversation. So we're excited to include some different departments that wouldn't naturally fit in their perspective, but we'll definitely, hopefully by the end of the presentation, have a nice collection of resources to share. Again, I want to plug in Texas Learn OER, and Judith, thank you for sharing the link in the chat. It is a wonderful place to begin if any of you want to learn more about it, or if you want to bring together departments, if you want to bring together different faculty across your campus, that is a great place to start. And you can also earn a certificate by completing all of the modules associated with that. Carrie Gitz is one of the people we definitely want to recognize for the work in Texas Learn OER. One of the things that we're really excited about communicating is we realize these are great professional learning activities to do, and they really are geared towards faculty or those that are designing content. But what we kept hearing from individuals was we need this community. We want to have an opportunity for us to get together, share ideas, learn from each other in action. And so we embarked on a wonderful journey with Digitex and the Texas Digital Library to create a community event called Open Texas Conference. Our Open Texas Conference actually came about after a regular group of librarians would meet just to talk about open education, had a summit. We decided to take it a step larger and have it become a conference. And we went from a physical to a virtual event. I'm very happy and excited to report that we actually had over 1,000 registrants for that conference. And it was incredible because that just demonstrated to us how much the desire was out there for people to learn more, for people to connect, to communicate, and to really adapt and redesign together. We decided that after that Open Texas Conference, through feedback from the participants, they wanted more. They wanted to find out what can I keep doing? How can I keep this momentum going? And it's really hard to keep up, but we tried our best. And so we created, in partnership with OpenStax at Rice University, Creator Fest OER Texas edition. And that was just completed in February. This was an opportunity, a hackathon style event where you got in and you started designing, you started peer reviewing, you started learning, how do I actually get a toolkit together so that I can embark on these different conversations, and how do I become part of an active part of the OER community space. So we had a little over 500 participants in the OER Texas edition session, and we're already hearing from people that want a dedicated Creator Fest for certain academic disciplines. And so we are going to keep that in mind, but we are going to continue with these community events. We are going to have our final community event in July, which is our Digital Learning Summit. And this will be an opportunity for us to talk about OER, but also extended topics within digital learning. So as you can see, we understand that there are limited resources at institutions, and we as a state are doing everything that we can to partner with our fellow thought leaders, to partner with national leaders, and bring these experiences to Texas, if in the lieu of our institutions being able to leverage the 2 instructional designers, 3 instructional designers that they have. If we can support them from a central spot, we will. Now, the most exciting piece about all of the work that we've done in Texas for OER is, thanks to, again, legislative support, we were able to create an OER Texas repository. And thank you, Judith, for dropping that link into the chat. Anyone can be a member of the OER Texas repository. You do not have to be from Texas to participate in that. And so we'll be able to, want a demonstration if you want to go to the next slide. This is OER Texas. It is a location where you can go and explore what resources are out there already ready for you to look at, to review, to adapt, to remix. OER Texas is now officially a year old. And in that 1 year, we have accomplished a lot. We've been able to bring together a community of over 132,000 users from all across the nation and across the globe. And we've been able to do that really through word of mouth, through this organic connection that has happened with one person sharing the idea of, hey, have you heard of OER Texas? And all of a sudden starting a group, starting a community, a special interest group, where we're able to talk about OER openly and are able to collaborate on several different projects. In addition, OER Texas actually has over 9,000 resources that have been added, and we're curating more every single day. Our faculty are actively promoting content development within their institutions, within their departments, within their communities, and their professional associations. The beauty of OER Texas is that it also has a built-in creation engine called Open Author. So if and when you are new to the creation game, this would give you a step-by-step look at how you build content, how you're able to add resources. And some of you may be thinking, well, I don't know if I have anything to contribute. If you've ever asked yourself, or you've ever shared a resource with one of your faculty colleagues, if you ever have been able to talk to someone else within your institution and say, hey, you're welcome to use my core shell, or you're welcome to use this lesson. That is a sense of openness and open resources. You just haven't officially put it in any type of database. And so in addition to OER Texas and that angle, we also have the ability for our institutions to have a hub presence. And that hub presence allows our participants to create a form of digital real estate presence within OER Texas. So we're really trying hard to promote this tool as a resource engine for faculty as well as for an institutional profile. And so we want to make sure that we can continue to promote that, but we welcome anyone from across what we like to call Texas Plus, which includes all of you on this call. We encourage you as well to be able to participate, create an account, browse through, see if you like something. In the OER Texas engine, there is also a way to review content. We are very well aware that one of the major barriers to adoption of OER is this question about quality and this question of vetting quality. And sometimes when we do that, we may want to stop and think there are always going to be some really positive resources out there, and maybe some that you would think, I'm not sure if I would adopt that. I would probably go about it differently. If you think about it in that lens, it's really the same thing that happens with OER resources. Some of them are amazing as is, and some of them provide a really good foundation for you to elaborate on. OER Texas allows you the opportunity to be able to take that content and adapt it, but also endorse something, or you're able to rate it. And that community rating allows you to be a little more confident when you're adopting your content. And so we don't start from scratch on OER Texas. Within OER Texas, we also have a getting started with OER section. So if you're just exploring, make sure to explore that hub, because it will allow you the opportunity to look at the resources that we have that will guide you step by step on how to get started with OER. It includes the Texas Learn OER segments, but also some testimonials from other faculty sharing their story. And the one thing I really challenge all of us on this call to think about is this is not an all or nothing game. You don't have to jump in and redesign your entire course from the onset as an open course. Maybe you start with one module at a time, one resource at a time, and then build from there. It's the same way you may not have taught online fully for the first time. Maybe you're still not teaching online. Maybe you're just adapting and adding digital enhancements. That's that same concept and that approach. Don't put so much pressure on yourself to jump in to the deep end right away. Take your steps and so forth. And that's what this community allows you to do. It allows you to look through resources, see if you identify with anything that you want to adapt or that you want to collect, you can. It's arranged in collections, it's arranged in the ability to create. And the most important piece is it allows you to build community. It allows you to create a folder. It allows you to create a group with people that you can invite or people that are already in the system. So you may not realize, but there may be people working on something very similar to you. Why not have that collaboration? Why not have that connection with other thought leaders from across the state and from the nation? So these are just some of the resources that we have available in Texas. We are going to continue to build and expand our portfolio as much as we can. Again, we're very grateful for the support that we have been granted from the state, and we look forward to continue to expand all of these different resources, programs, and services. And I do believe we are good on time, so we are good for questions if we do have any. And again, please don't hesitate to contact any of us if you'd like the information that we talked about. Judith is sharing that resources page, which has access to several of these. But please, we are always looking to share ideas and learn from you. So make sure to reach out. We're always available.
Well, while we wait for a couple of questions to come in, one of the questions that I have for you all is, what would you say the ratio to, I guess, let me take a step back. We have a barrier of faculty think it's all or nothing, right? Like you have to either create the OER from scratch or you can't do it, or you can, they don't think about it as the bite-sized thing is that you were just sort of mentioning, Michelle. What would you say the ratio of sort of adapted materials or adopted materials are to fully created materials in your repository?
So I think they vary. It really depends a lot on discipline And it depends a lot on, sometimes we have different academic disciplines that have been established for a really long time in the OER space. You're looking at things like economics, things like rhetoric, things English, where we have a lot of content. And in those cases, you would find things equivalent to, let's say, an EPAC from a publisher that has all of the ancillaries as well as all the core content. But then you would also be looking at things like cybersecurity and looking at these really relative up-to-date topics that have real world examples that are going on today. And so I would say, honestly, just anecdotally, that we probably have more on the individual one bite at a time, as you mentioned, than we would whole packets of modules or courses. And I think that says a lot because our faculty were looking for an avenue to express and to share, especially with the transition to remote learning. Everyone was looking for an outlet on how can I get information, but more than anything, how can my information help my fellow colleague? And so that's where we really saw that uptick on one module at a time, one resource at a time, and so forth. And I invite Judith or Kyla to add to that in any way if you would like.
I just say we have heard from faculty that they actually prefer the bite-sized approach so that they can be more creative with their when designing their courses. So a lot of the resources in OER texts provide for that.
I can't speak to OER tech specifically, but anecdotally, and probably a lot of you who are attending here are aware of this, a big challenge for faculty in adopting OER often are the ancillary materials that they need, be they test banks and other assessments, PowerPoint or Google Slides, those sort of materials. So that, we really as a community need to come together and give back. If we're adopting a text or a bite-sized resource or what have you, and you create those types of assessments or ancillary materials, give them back to the community, license them openly and put them back in a repository. And I think that's really going to move the needle, I think, on faculty adoption. Having been a faculty member myself, that, I know developing those takes a lot of time and really developing effective, especially say authentic assessments can take time. So the more that we can add to these repositories, those ancillary materials, the better for the community.
Well, I'll just ask another question as we wait for things to come in. I know that none of you are at a specific campus necessarily for what you do, but what do you see, or do you see any sort of a tension or a push and pull between this program that you're working on, and then a lot of us have campuses where the bookstore needs to make money, right? And how does the bookstore make money but to sell textbooks to students is one of the many ways, right? Do you see any kind of a push and pull there? I know you have state funding and state support from your legislature, but sometimes we do have to think about a bottom line. Do you work with bookstores at all on these campuses to talk about these issues?
Michelle, would you like to take that rather somewhat controversial topic?
Sure. Why not? So I actually was at institutions prior to joining the coordinating board. And so I think several institutions have a good relationship and a positive relationship with their bookstores, that their bookstores are actually the ones that are listing OER and are also the ones that are designating OER only courses within. I think the conversation that we just talked about in this all or nothing bite size is also having an impact on that, because a lot of our courses are not looking to replace a full textbook. They are looking to complement it. They are looking to enhance their curriculum. And so I think a lot of these conversations, when the OER conversation originally started, it was about affordability. And it still is one of those main topics that we look to OER for affordability for our students. But now the conversation is shifting a little bit, and we're really excited to the value add that OER brings. This open pedagogy concept, this community think tank concept, this access concept where our students will have access to materials on day one. Sometimes it's difficult for bookstores to even stock all of the textbooks necessary. And so if you don't need to have that and you have the resource, so it's not so much something that we want to be in a competitive nature or a competition, but it's more along the lines of how can we complement each other. And we've seen really great conversations from bookstores in the sense of how can we market OER, because they realize this is a relatively new game to the long-standing bookstore game. And so I think as long as we can start to remember all of these additional layers of impact of OER, the conversation goes pretty well.
Michelle, I'm so glad you brought that up. My organization, we're quite staunch advocates for open educational resources. And absolutely, the affordability piece is a big part of it. That is one kind of pillar to supporting equity for students. But OER have affordances that go beyond affordability that help support equity in terms of the development of the material, making it more accessible, making it more culturally relevant, making it more relevant to individual contexts for a campus, for a student, what have you. So we really, and I think the nature of our funding is a little bit different than the nature of the funding of the coordinating board, that we're able to be, I think, fairly staunch advocates for open education and openly licensed materials, while we recognize that the reality for campuses are such that they often have to have a variety of options for their students, and they see that as the best way to support their student success. And those options may include things like inclusive access programs. But what we're involved in an initiative with Spark and other partners called inclusiveaccess.org. And this initiative, as some of you may have heard, is very much about educating about what are the pros and cons related to inclusive access and ensuring that there is transparency surrounding that. And Texas passed legislation this past session. We have sessions every other year that it was focused on ensuring transparency when it comes to these automatic textbook billing programs, or AKA inclusive access. But campuses need options. We're aware of the reality of that, but we really have made it our mission to ensure that one of the options that they're able to look at is open education. Kyla, did you have anything to add to that?
No, you took the words right out of my mouth about House Bill 1027. It's actually, Texas is sort of on the forefront with that. Not many states have that sort of open transparency when it comes to that automatic textbook billing. So, and also those companies having access to student data. So.
Okay, so one of the, this is I think more a comment than a question, but equitable access models are the only way to fully implement OER through the bookstore. Just letting you know that that came in and sharing that with the group. I think equitable access is sort of how we're, and I don't know, because I was not unable to attend the bookstore session yesterday. We did have a panel with bookstore representatives, but I think that they're moving away maybe from inclusive access to a little bit more of equitable access to ensure, when a student buys that book and that code, right, that they get to use it more than once, and that their access doesn't get cut off 2 days after a semester ends. And, you might need that book again for a different course, or you might want to study something again and you don't have access to that book. So I think there's a lot of room there in that spectrum.
But I do want to make clear that that is not the same as openly licensed materials. Materials that have an open license that allow for the 5 R's, the remixing, the revising, the retention, the other R's. So it is something different. But it is complicated when you're talking about bookstores, bookstore revenue, getting these materials into the hands of the students, and bookstores are often the best to do that. So I'm aware of that, but I just want to make that point clear. Those programs are not openly licensed materials.
Yes, thank you. Actually, Judith, this is maybe a question for you and Kyla. Are you asking, I know you're probably thinking about your next survey and questions that you're going to ask. Are you asking your institutions to talk about whether the tenure and promotion process is part of OER, and how is that being incorporated on these different campuses? I'd be very curious to hear how 110, 111 campuses respond to that, and how it might change over time.
Oh, what a great question. Kyla, Michelle, why don't I let you all field that one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And there certainly has been movement in this area at some Texas institutions. So that would be really interesting data to collect as far as what their policies are at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's an important issue because, if faculty are putting all the work into creating these materials, it should count potentially for their tenure and promotion. Or should at least be recognized by the institution. Yeah.
Well, and I think the conversation that we also take is outside of OER, the digital learning, the larger conversation, right? What it takes to develop online courses. That conversation has actually been in place in a long time in the digital learning sector, is where is the value of investing all of this time into design and to learning how to teach digitally. Where does that get weighted in the larger piece of, was it research, is it teaching, does it have the same weight? And we just recently talked to several institutions during Open Ed Week, of course, about a similar topic. In these competing priorities are also a major barrier for adoption, right? I mean, people would love to adopt OER, but it is a process. You have to vet things, you have to find things, so it is a time investment, sometimes a time investment that you cannot take away from research, or you cannot take away from the other agenda that you are on track for tenure and promotion. And so it is a conversation. Of course, this is an established academic historical concept. And so it is going to take a lot of dialogue. But we are happy to say is that with the transition and with the heightened awareness during the pandemic of online education and digital education, people are more open to having that conversation and exploring what type of impact there is.
I think it's important to mention, and this goes along with what you're saying with Michelle and Kyla, is, it takes resources to develop these programs, be they online learning courses and programs, or be they open educational resources. And it's so imperative that we are rewarding that labor. And whether that reward is through promotion and tenure, or through a permanent position if someone is a contingent faculty member, or through financial remuneration, we just need to make sure that we're not exploiting the labor that is developing and creating these innovative, equitable resources and programs to serve our students. That's a bit of a soapbox.
I am also on that soapbox. I feel like, yes, you can't ask people to do all of this work and invest all of this time and not somehow reward them. Whether we consider tenure reward or not is a very different discussion for a very different panel, right? But just to say that faculty see it as a reward, and it's sometimes better to them than money, right? So that's something we should all think about. I just want to get back to the Q&A, and someone here has said, equitable access is a flat rate per credit hour billing system like tuition and fees for all OER, digital, physical, and course supplies. It provides day one access for students regardless of major. So just wanted to share that with the group. Someone in the comments is saying that both bookstores yesterday were run independently with a flat fee per credit hour, which is paid by the students. Most of the bookstores in Missouri are for profit, however. Can you say what percentage of the for-profit versus non-for-profit bookstores there are in Texas? Do you know the answer to that? No. Okay.
There are over 200 and something institutions. And everyone has their own ability to select their contracts. So that would be a very difficult question for us to answer right off the cuff. Sorry about that.
Sure.
That's a great question, though. Thank you. Sorry that we do not know.
Well, there's a few minutes left. I'm not sure if there are any more questions. You have all answered my questions, so thank you. I appreciate that. This has been fascinating, interesting look as a nice counterpoint to yesterday's panel. Again, a lot of those folks also had Achieving the Dream grants, and then we're able to either turn that into state funding, or we're able to somehow capitalize that on their campus as well. So that's interesting to hear that that the Achieving the Dream was a big Kickstarter for a lot of these programs, I think, some of these statewide programs. Another comment that just came in, most of Missouri, I believe, are nonprofit, including the flagship. Texas is meant to be is mostly contract managed. Yes. So as you were saying, it's going to depend from campus to campus. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Attendees, please provide feedback on this session through the survey that will pop up at the end when you close the window. An overall conference survey will be mailed out to all attendees at the end of the conference. we hope that you will join us for the next session, which is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central Time. And it is a provost panel on OER. And I know I am very interested to hear what provosts are looking for when they want information about OER. So we hope to see you all then. Thank you all for attending, and thank you all for presenting. Have a lovely day.
Well, thank you for your moderation. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tracy.